Welcome back to Gilmour Racing. On this episode, it's all about this car, the Mygale 2007 Formula 3. It's a super cool car. I've always liked this car. It's a little bit different, it's a little bit quirky, it's got some really innovative features that a lot of the other cars don't have, and every time you pull the covers off this thing, people swarm around it. Trent Grubel's been driving this car for the last couple of rounds. We've improved it, but we're still not happy with the performance. We think we can get it a little bit quicker. So on this episode, we're not only going to race prep this car for the final round, we're going to make some changes and adjustments that will hopefully make it a bit nicer for Trent to drive and easier for him to get the most out of the car. On the previous video with the Dallara, we really stressed how important it is to visually inspect every component of these cars. They cop a really hard time, and being on top of the maintenance is a whole lot of hard work, to be honest. It's a lot of hours in the workshop. Much like the Dallara, it's got these wheel backing plates that serve a couple of functions. Other than cleaning up the airflow, they also help hold the brake temperature inside the rim, allowing the rim to build temperature quicker, brings the tyres on quicker, and it really helps us out in the early laps of our race. We don't have a ton and a half of car to work the tyre really hard. It's a relatively light car with a bit of aero, but this really helps the tyres come up to temperature quicker. These are only held on by a couple of small brackets, and they break, they fatigue and snap off, and we've just had one on the other side break. We've had the bracket off and TIG welded it up. So now that that's done, we're going to do the brake pads. Same as the Dallara. Every time this thing hits the track while we run it, it'll get a new set of brake pads all round. So the driver knows exactly what to expect every time he stands on the brakes. But a little bit different to the red cars, you can see how low the calipers are mounted in relation to the center line of the axle. The Dallara's up 100, 150 mil maybe. So the Mygale's really conscious on the center of gravity and have done everything they possibly can to get the weight as low as they can, and it's not practical. On the back, it's an absolute pain in the backside to bleed them. You've got to actually pull them off the car to bleed them properly, but every little bit of performance adds up and helps, and with all these small changes, it certainly makes her a really cool car. With this cover removed, you can really see how different the setup is to the Dallara. The springs are out the front, the shockeys are back here, the bell cranks are moulded into the tub itself with a sway bar down near the feet of the driver. Also, I can only assume they've done this to keep the center of gravity as low as possible, but it's also just a different way of doing the same thing. Now, one of the complaints we've always had with this car is it's a little bit lazy in the steering through the middle of the corner. It is a longer wheelbase than the Dallara, so it will inherently take longer to change direction, but we think we can make some changes at the front of the car to try to sharpen it up. We've come to the conclusion that the front is too stiff. It's not conforming to the track as it needs to. It's fine while the aero's on, while we've got the downforce to plant the car into the track, but the actual mechanical grip, we don't have the front grip we need through the middle of the corner. So we've done two things. We've changed the springs. Springs out the front here, we've got boxes and boxes of springs in very small increments, so what we've done this time round is just go that little bit softer, just to help the front of the car pitch, roll and transfer the weight. And another thing we've done, we've run out of adjustment on the front sway bar. We ended up full soft and we could have gone a little bit softer, so we've changed the sway bar. What's the Mygale sway bar look like? That's it there. Really nice bit of gear. It mounts in below the tub there near the driver's feet, and we've got different thicknesses of these. Depending on how thick that is, that's where the twist is generated in the middle of the sway bar. A thinner sway bar will be softer, a thicker sway bar will be stiffer. And then on top of that, we've got the blade adjustments that hang out the top, and we can turn them. It essentially becomes our fine adjustment, with the sway bar choice becoming our coarse adjustment. So we're hopefully back to the middle of adjustment, and we can adjust either way to fine tune it at the track. I did promise you different, and here it is. The rear setup of this car is worlds apart from the back of the Dallara. This is a genuine pull rod suspension, really low mounted bell cranks, shock absorbers on the side of the gearbox, springs in the center of the gearbox, and sway bar on top of that. It's a very unique setup and a different way of doing things, but it's very effective. Once again, it aids in the low center of gravity with all the hardware being mounted really low in the car, but also gives the designer extra freedoms and more room to create this rear diffuser without the limitations of a standard suspension system. How they've done it, they've increased the space under the car for the diffuser, but we're also able to bring it further towards the front of the car. Therefore, it's more effective at low and high speeds, and gives a better balance. One of the other concerns we had at the last race meeting was it developed a part throttle misfire, almost a slight stutter as you get on the gas. And this was hurting Trent with that initial jump out of the corner. We changed spark plugs, we changed ignition leads, we changed coil pack, we changed the master switch, but nothing really seemed to affect it. And what we've found since then is the fuel tank's full of shavings. It's had a fuel pump, I'd say it's had a fuel pump expire in the fuel tank, and they haven't cleaned it out. There's a lot of garbage in there floating around. So what we're going to do is, we've just serviced the spare airbox. Now this is the same engine as we run in the Dallara. So we're going to swap our airbox, our injectors, our wiring harness and everything, and put it on this engine, and hopefully we'll get rid of that misfire. Now we use the same fuel rig for all the cars. They've all got the same quick couplers on the tank and all use the same system. And like I said in the previous video, fuel is a major contributor. We measure how much fuel goes in, how much fuel comes out, and especially with this car being as light as it is, we actually use fuel as ballast for Trent to get him up to the minimum weight. So the fuel rig is a massive part of the team and is very critical. Now, establishing this has dirty fuel, we need to get it clean somehow. Pulling the tank out is a massive job and not something we're going to do mid-season. We'll probably wait till the end of the season, but what we've come up with is simply a fuel filter between the two couplers, so we can filter this out and then filter it back in, and hopefully within a couple of fills we can clean the fuel tank. They don't run in the cars themselves, they don't run a filter as such, so anything that's in the tank will certainly end up in the injectors. So it's imperative for us, now that we've put fresh injectors in the car, that we need to know that it's got fresh fuel and it's not going to do it again. We've just finished up on putting the airbox back together and putting it on the car. We checked it to make sure it had no leaks, resealed the mating face, new air filter, all the usual stuff. Now, as part of trying to find this misfire, we've also changed the battery master key. Nothing special, just a plastic master key that lives down inside the side of the car, inside the side pod. Now this has to put up with a lot of heat and vibration. It's not so far away from the engine, it has a really tough life. The weight of the battery cables hang off the bottom, and these are just a solid contact. The contacts get dirty, corrode, and cause all sorts of problems. Usually we would change these annually anyway, and we don't know when this one was last changed, so we've thrown a new one of them in. Now to get to this battery key that's inside the side pod, we need a special tool to reach down inside the car and turn it on. It's not outside the car, so it's not in the airflow, and like a lot of the components on these cars, they're mounted as low as you could possibly get them. The gearbox ratios have just been finalised for Phillip Island. Same as the red car, we changed all the ratio. This thing looked really good inside, so we've had to do very little work really. We've just changed the gears, filled it back up with oil, and it's ready to go. Inspection under the car, it's the wood floor as a wear strip under the car is held on by countersunk Allen head bolts, and the heads of these bolts get ripped off, the floor comes loose and causes issues. I've just changed maybe 15 bolts under the car because the heads have been worn off. It's something we actually normally do at the end of the day on, say, a Friday or a Saturday. It's a consumable part of the car that cops a really hard time, and it's super important. If that floor is allowed to come loose and flap down, it switches the rear diffuser off and the car loses the majority of its downforce. You'll lose a lot of straight line speed, but also a lot of grip, and may even cause an accident. So it's a high priority job. We've already spoken about the suspension changes we've made at the front of the car to help making it more direct, more steerable. Another thing we've changed is the wheel alignment themselves. Phillip Island's got a very high average speed, so we want as less rolling resistance as we can get, so basically all the wheels pointing as straight as we can get them, but we can also fine tune that to get that little bit of extra turn in or mid-corner steering. These get wheel aligned every time before they go out anyway to make sure nothing's moved from an impact or hitting a curb, but we've also made the changes, and hopefully this will give us big benefits on the track, and hopefully Trent will notice a difference. Both the front and rear wings are massively adjustable on these cars, and not only do we change this track to track, but also during the weekend. These are what we use to get our aero balance. Should we need fine adjustment, a little bit of extra turning or a little bit more rear grip at speed, this is where we make those changes. Now that all our suspension changes are finalised and our wheel alignment sorted, we need to get this on the flat patch and to get the corner weight sorted. We know we are okay for minimum weight. This car's actually got ballast in it because the car is so light, but we need to make sure we've got the balance right and we haven't upset the corner weights too much. For those of you who didn't see the last video, how do we pick these cars up and how do we move them around? The absolute easiest way to get them anywhere is to lift them up. They're too low, you can't push them anywhere, they bottom out. Really poor turning circle. So the easiest way to move them around is to pick them up. And we do this by picking them up from the roll hoop. It's the strongest part of the car. It's also our tow point. Definitely a handy bit of gear. And you can see how well the car is balanced. It's just floating there by itself. Basically the exact center of gravity. In front of that, we've got the driver. Now this thing, we've spoken about some of the differences with the aero. This has got a V tub, very similar to the Williams that was designed by Adrian Newey. Helps the airflow under the front of the car, around the butt of the driver, into the side pods and around the floor, ultimately aiding the diffuser at the back of the car. It makes it a little bit unique in its seating position in the fact that you do have the V in the bottom of the tub, and also your feet. You don't really have room to move the heel of your feet, but you've got plenty of room to move your toes. So once again, it's a little bit different on how you angle your feet to control the pedals in this car. But once again, another thing that makes this car that little bit different, but also that little bit better than the competition, it gives it its strengths and weaknesses almost polar opposites to the Dallara. It's no good having the same strengths and weaknesses, you'll never pass it. If you can do something a little bit different, the benefit is you have the opportunity to get around that car in front of you. This is a flat patch we've been using at Gilmour Racing. Now we do quite a few cars in here. We've set it up in the middle of the floor so everybody can use it and not get in each other's way. These are on adjustable pads. They've all been laser leveled. They are all dead flat and perfect. We then put the scales on top of them and then the car on top of it. So we can assume that this is dead flat, and what we're trying to do is get the car evenly to weigh front and rear. We don't want too much of a discrepancy, especially on the front. It'll cause a brake lock up under heavy braking, because that wheel will be a little bit too light. Now, we've put this on the scales and straight away it's actually pretty close to where it needs to be. We were pretty particular when we put the new springs in. And another trick is to disconnect the sway bar. If you've got the sway bar connected, it will try to essentially correct the weight, and it makes it really, really hard to adjust it. You'll be chasing it for a long time. With the sway bars disconnected, you're just weighing that corner individually. It's not trying to transfer the weight to the other side of the car. It makes your life a whole lot easier. A little bit of adjustment and we've got it within half a kilo, 500 grams across the front wheels, and I'm really happy with that. This car's a little bit heavier than the Dallara, but this has a whole lot of weight in it and also runs more fuel, just to get Trent up to the minimum weight and give us a bit of a cushion. So if we do have excessive running or an extra lap, we won't go underweight. Other than that, this thing's done. We're really happy with it. Everything's come up the way we'd hoped it would, and we've hoped the changes we've made will help Trent. We hope we'll see a noticeable improvement at Phillip Island and hopefully give him a car that he enjoys to drive. But that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Stay tuned and we'll see how this thing goes at Phillip Island.